rationale for content today and both sessions today is when you read Boas's book, there is reference to Anna O and Dora. So I thought just getting a baseline, a sense of understanding of the history might be good. So the PDF that I could not send that has the Anna O material, Stan's got on this computer now. Anybody wants to go into my zip drive here after class is over and put it on your stuff is fine. And I thought I had scanned and sent these chapters from Crone. That's on the reading for a week from Tuesday. I wanted to get, it's a big gap between Freud and Boas. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to send out a reading, especially for clinicians, that kind of looked at some of the traditional understandings of hysteria with different discernments. I think this is also the book that points out that hysteria really is an Oedipal dynamic, not a pre-Oedipal dynamic, like a narcissism would be a pre-Oedipal and borderline would be pre-Oedipal. I thought that hysteria was pre-Oedipal, but that's not traditionally how it's been looked at clinically. I may have this on my jump drive. I just noticed that I had a different definition. I didn't have Crone. I didn't have hysteria, the elusive neurosis. I had it as definitions and illustrations, so it may be on my jump drive and will migrate to Stan's. If not, I'll probably send it out by PDF in 2 pieces and get UPS started. I can scan at home on my 3-in-1 printer, yes, but it doesn't like thick documents. So we'll get it to you.
You know what would be great for me is if you could just send me a small section of it through electronically, and then I can take it on my trip.
Well, the PDF would work.
I can give you my email.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll give you my email address, and then you can just send it directly.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
So, I found this interesting, good reading. I think the clinicians or you who are working with patients will appreciate what's in here. It's not the last word. It's just kind of hints at the kind of dialogue around hysteria that went on from Freud's time on up to where Boas begins to pick up on the concern. The official title of Freud's famous case study is Fragments of an Analysis of a Case of Hysteria, in the Dora case. In this case, Freud details the condition and treatment of Ida Bauer, who was diagnosed with hysteria and assigned the pseudonym Dora. If I remember right, there is a child sitter or nursemaid or something in Freud's family, and she had the same name as Freud's sister, so she got nicknamed Dora. So that's where Freud lifts that pseudonym from.
So is this what he called his the deity or the housekeeper when he was a little boy?
I think so.
Interesting, because that was a very close attachment that he had to her.
Interesting.
Dora.
Dora.
Dora the Explorer. Thinking in my head, I don't know.
So the treatment was in 1900, but this piece was published in 1905 as a companion piece to Freud's very famous or infamous book, The Interpretation of Dreams, which certainly influenced Jung. And I've heard Jungians go back and revisit some of the dream material that Freud worked with. There's one called Irma's Injection, where I think it's Brewer who maybe gets some woman shoots a hypodermic in him. There's something to do with needles, and you know what Freudians think about needles, I'm sure. sharp phallic instruments. Anyway, I heard a Jungian treatment of that dream in Zurich, actually, when I was studying there. Freud gained insight into Dora's neurosis through dream interpretation. So this case study has been valued over the years for the, quote, scientific empiricism of Freud's method. Again, Freud is coming out of that neurologist background as a medical doctor and caught in his own dilemma of getting into these close psychoanalytic encounters and not really trying to be. Jung had the same dilemma. How do you take scientific or rational understanding of non-rational material, like psychic material? And in the case study, Freud also dealt with the phenomenon and issue of transference in the treatment and perhaps countertransference, although Freud did not take a good look at his own countertransference. Freud's method tried to resolve the problem through talking, which enabled both doctor and patient to identify the subconscious problem, or unconscious problem, to confront it, to resolve it, and to ultimately alleviate the symptoms. Freud had treated Dora's father for a venereal disease some years earlier. Dora's parents had what we would now call a non-conjugal marriage, or a marriage of convenience, is what Jungians often call it, in contrast to a marriage of eros, where there is passion and a core experience of love. Dora had an eccentric uncle and a neurotic aunt. Their family was close with another couple who get named Herr and Frau. Correct my German pronunciations, Bonnie. Bonnie worked for Department of Defense.
No, it was a ASAS that was contracted by the DOD.
In Germany, so she knows German pretty well.
I'm Vision.
Dora's father had a secret affair with Frau K for some time, and Herr K tried to woo Dora from age 14 on. Freud began seeing Dora in 1898 at age 16. Dora had hysterical symptoms from age 8. The symptoms included physical impairments such as headaches, depression, coughing, loss of voice, and others. These were not related to an organic physical cause. Freud did not have an opportunity to treat her psychologically as symptoms abated. Her father asked Freud to treat her again 2 years later. This was prompted by Dora's claim that Herr K propositioned her when they were strolling alone. She was treated for 3 months then by Freud. Freud had hoped to trace neurotic symptoms to an organic or neurological source. He noted a hereditary element with so much family neuroses. He wondered about Dora's reaction to her father's syphilis. He thought that perhaps a neurotic would use their biology to pursue psychological goals that might be unconscious. He questioned Dora about her bedwetting that accompanied her masturbation. He noted a, quote, flight into illness, in which sickness can provide secondary gain. Freud identified Dora's conflict between her love of Herr K and her unresolved issues with her sexuality, which caused the hysterical symptoms. He concluded that Dora desired Herr K, that she was aroused by the sexual approach, his sexual approach. Since love of her father, while feeling, she regressed into an infantile love of her father while feeling resentful and vengeful toward him. Freud concluded that beneath the conflicts and desires there was a homosexual desire for Frau K as the source of her hysteria. The case began with a description of his research methodology, examining the effectiveness of this new method of treatment through conversation. We have to remember that in Freud's time, patients listened to the doctor. He was the patriarchal captain of the ship, so to speak. With Freud and this talking cure, chimney sweeping, to quote Anna, it profoundly shifted, that the physician began to listen carefully to the patient. And we all try to continue that practice in our own work. Ellenberger, the guy who wrote this history of psychoanalysis, was inspired by this case, actually, and he realized there was a physician in Vienna who listened carefully to every word spoken by his patients. That's part of the legacy of this particular case. Freud emphasized the importance of dreams to the psychoanalytic process that he will later describe. He believed that dreams were the road through which traumatic experiences in the past manifest themselves. It would be possible to identify the underlying traumatic experiences by looking at the individual components of a dream. Freud gave a detailed history of the patient without identifying her real identity. Her family consisted of Dora, her father, mother, and brother, all of which portray the traits and relationships which Freud would characterize as what complex?
Oedipal?
Yeah, the Oedipal complex, right. Which Freud thought played a significant role between Dora, her father, and their neighbors, the K's, Er and Frau K. Freud notes that Dora's symptoms are those of classic hysteria. He believed they began around age 8, but manifested more boldly at 14. This was at the time when Er K, the family friend and neighbor, forcibly embraced and kissed Dora, pressing his genital area on her and causing her to flee in disgust. Freud identified two psychological effects which are typically associated with traumatic experiences. One is called reversal of affect, whereby an act that typically would be pleasurably stimulating has the opposite effect. So instead of sexual arousal, you've got flight. And there's this phenomenon that Freud called displacement, in which a sensation felt during a traumatic event in one part of the body is experienced later in a seemingly unaffected area of the body. Kind of psychosomatic insight there. Freud focused then on the relationship of Dora and her father. Freud states that Frau K, while nursing Dora's father back to health from an illness, began an intimate relationship with him. This was an underlying element in Dora's hysteria. Dora's repressed homosexual feelings for Frau K manifested in a similar way to her unconscious feelings for Er K. Freud examined two dreams which Dora shared with him. In the initial dream, a house is on fire. Anybody have any association to fire?
Passion? Sex?
No. Could be. Yeah. Some of my clinical training, I remember a supervisor saying, if you see fire or smoke in a dream, there's probably anger there somewhere.
Huh.
So, a house is on fire. This is Dora's narrative. My father was standing beside my bed and woke me up. I dressed quickly. Mother wanted to stop and save her jewel case, but father said, I refuse to let myself and my two children be burnt for the sake of your jewel case. We hurried downstairs, and as soon as I was outside, I woke up. What would you do with that dream?
I wonder what Mama's jewel case represents.
What do you think a Freudian would say?
I don't know if he's alluding to Mama's sexual need or
There's this expression called the family jewels,
Yes.
which I think would go for the genitalia of either
Yes.
men or women.
yes.
Freud suggests the jewel case is associated with Dora's genitals,
Oh, okay.
which she felt were in danger due to Heir K, who is represented by her father in the dream. There you get a little bit of displacement.
So the mother is standing in the place of Dora. Mother wants to get the jewel case out of there. It's Dora's jewel case.
Yeah. In the second dream, this is again Dora's narrative. I was walking about in a town which I did not know. I saw streets and squares which were strange to me. Then I came into a house where I lived, went to my room, and found a letter from Mother lying there. She wrote saying that as I had left home without my parents' knowledge, she had not wished to write to me to say Father was ill. Now he is dead, and if you like, you can come. Then I went to the station, train station, and asked 100 times, where is the station? I always got the answer, 5 minutes. I then saw a thick wood before me, forest, which I went into, and here I asked a man whom I met. He said to me, 2.5 hours more. He offered to accompany me, but I refused and went alone. I saw the station in front of me and could not reach it. At the same time, I had the unusual feeling of anxiety that one has in dreams when one cannot move forward. Then I was at home. I must have been traveling in the meantime, but I knew nothing about that. I walked into the porter's lodge and inquired for our flat. The maidservant opened the door to me and replied that Mother and others were already at the cemetery at the father's death. Any attempts to work with that? Any thoughts come up?
I wonder who the man is that she met in the wood. Wondered if that was Freud. But this whole thing about time, 5 minutes more, and then the man in the wood says 2.5 hours more. And it says he'll go with her, and she doesn't want to.
Eventually, she kind of has that reaction to the analysis in Freud. She leaves prematurely. Certainly that whole thing, paralysis, anxiety. Freud interpreted both dreams as referring to Dora's sexual life. The jewel case in danger was a symbol of her virginity, which her father was failing to protect from Heir K. The railroad station in the second dream was a similar symbol. Freud insisted that Dora has responded to Heir K's advances with her own desire, noting, quote, "You are afraid of Heir K. You are even more afraid of yourself." That's Freud to Dora. And of the temptation to yield to him. Must be the woman's fault, right?
And she's only 16.
Yeah.
Yeah. This increasingly alienated Dora.
Well, that's when the problem started.
But that kind of confrontation in the therapeutic relationship alienates Dora. Freud concluded that the dream was a fantasy of revenge against her father in Fra K. He connects the letter Dora receives from her mother in the dream to being related or corresponding to a letter that she actually received from Heir K, arguing that this displacement shows how traumatic her experiences with Heir K really had been. Freud's treatment of Dora ends when Dora abruptly decides to end the treatment. Freud believed this was an act perpetuated out of vengeance. He ended this case study by examining the importance of this most important discovery, the transference.
So isn't, in a way, Freud like Heir K to her? Just as threatening, as Heir K is threatening sexually, Freud is threatening psychologically about exploring this. He's
Parallel
shouting,
process.
yeah.
Parallel
That's what it
process.
is. Accept it.
I can see why that wouldn't have gone over really well. But it's amazing at 16 she had the wherewithal to leave.
Yeah, yeah. But it's her, Freud's interpretation is it's her erotic response that she's really fleeing from.
Oh, not that he's being so
As
aggressive.
opposed to an empowered teenager saying, that's really rude and insensitive behavior. Well, transference, it's acted out, isn't it? So we've already talked about that definition of the transference, a new edition or facsimile of the tendencies and fantasies which are aroused and made conscious during the progress of the analysis. But they have this peculiarity that they replace some earlier person by the person of the physician. Transference involve the projection of emotions held by the patient for a person from his or her past onto the treating physician, which is right with a parallel process with Freud. Dora returned to see Freud 2 years after ending treatment. She said her symptoms were mostly gone, that she had confronted the K's, who said that she had been right all along. However, she had recently had pains in her face. Freud added to his report, but still understood his work with Dora as an overall failure. He blamed himself for not highlighting Dora's attachment to Frau K rather than to Herr K. The main transferences of Dora were that of her father and Herr K onto Freud. Her taking leave of Freud prematurely was a vengeful transference towards Freud. The unsuccessful outcome was due to Freud's failure to make this conscious to Dora. That was his self-recognition, I guess, whereby there might have been the opportunity to work through the transference. Freud admitted, a quote from Freud, "I did not succeed in mastering the transference in good time." Freud may have failed to help Dora due to the imposition of his own theories and interpretations and his losing sight of her legitimate concerns for truth in a duplicitous family environment. Some have felt Freud pushed his own views onto Dora's subjectivity, thus doing a kind of psychological violence to her, rather than creating a safe, supportive, non-judgmental, empathic, free space for her to deepen her own inner exploration and insight. Countertransference. And I was in control analysis. Jungians always have, in training, have to be in personal analysis. And many continue to be after getting certified by an institute's training program. But then midway through, we have an exam called the Propaedeuticum. And in Zurich, that meant the Propaedeuticum was some entry into a deeper temple in the old Greek temples. And so you spend the first, 3 years of training in Zurich with the theoretical material, and then after you pass the Propaedeuticum, you could see patients under control analysis. Well, these days, our institute in Chicago, you have to be licensed to walk through the door. They spent a lot of money getting one of the most conservative legal opinions on that, and it was really everybody involved in training should be licensed. And so people come into training with their practices and incomes, and but you do have to have control analysis at some point. But supervision up until the Propaedeuticum, you pass that, and then you begin to accrue hours of control analysis. Well, I was in control analysis with Lee Roloff, who was on the faculty, I think, in literature at Northwestern University, and a very wise man. And I went through this period where I just read so much of, I'm blocking the name, the author wrote, did analysis with Jung, I think. we've got a picture of him hanging on our stairway. Who am I thinking of? Wrote the book Damien Herman Hesse.
Oh, Hesse.
Yeah, I just had this craving to read Hesse. And in fact, I was sailing with my youngest son, and his godparents had this beautiful sailboat in the Pacific Northwest, and we were up there, and I had been misdiagnosed with some pain that I was getting abdominally. I'd be hospitalized and get a shot of Dilaudid, and if you work for yourself, you don't want to lose money. So I felt fine in the morning, checked myself out of the hospital, and it must have been 3 or 4 times I went in for pain relief, basically, and they said it was a strawberry gallbladder, cholecystitis of the gallbladder. So I went on a fat-free diet, which probably was good anyway. And then I went and saw a acupuncturist who felt it wasn't my gallbladder, it was my colon. But the time between these painful episodes extended out. And so anyway, I'm on this boat in British Columbia and out in the islands, and everybody else goes to breakfast, and I'm like dying on the floor of the boat, the inner space of the boat. And they come back, and the skipper, my oldest son's godfather, calls for a physician, and this old Dutch country physician comes in and puts his finger into my belly and pulls it out, and I flinch. And he said, "You've got appendicitis."
Oh, jeez.
So for almost 2 years, I had chronic appendicitis,
Oh, for God's sakes.
which American doctors don't believe in.
What?
They don't believe in it's acute. It's acute appendicitis. They don't believe in chronic appendicitis, but that's what I had. So they emergency ambulanced me off the island, and I'm saying to the surgeon in the Campbell River Hospital, "It's my gallbladder."
Yeah.
He said, "Well, surgery's going to happen in 3 hours," or whatever. And then when I got through the surgery, he said, "Well, I guess we cured your gallbladder." He was a narcissistic but sharp surgeon. But anyway, in the hospital, I'm reading Hermann Hesse, Narcissus and Goldman. And of course, in Canada, they believe in pain relief. So I'd read a page or a paragraph, fall asleep, read the same page, fall asleep. But I really had this urge to read Hermann Hesse, and I read a lot. Well, I must have got around this in a session of control analysis with Lee, and I'm sitting there, and I'm confessing this obsession. And he said, "Well, look on the bookshelf just to your left." And there's a whole shelf of Hermann Hesse's novels. He said, "I just finished teaching a course on Hermann Hesse. Now, this is your lesson about transference and countertransference."
Ah.
So,
My
affecting
oldest
you.
son's middle name is Damien, spelled the way
that's right.
Hesse.
Yeah. Well, around transference, if you can get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and I can talk you through this. And write analyst and patient, and under each, in parentheses, you might put ego.
What were the titles again?
Analyst, and or patient. And then, let's assume it's a male analyst. Then, in keeping with the
And a
tradition
female
in our
analyst.
literature,
Patriarchy abounds.
and staying in the tradition of Freud and Jung, we'll make that assumption. So below the analyst, put anima.
Anima?
Anima, which is Jung's term for the feminine in a male psyche. And then below the patient, put animus.
We're assuming the patient's a woman?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, the traditional way of doing it. And then, so in a Jungian understanding of transference, you have you can put arrows between these, between the two, the analyst and the patient. Put an arrow with a pointing both ways. So you get a patient, and you're at a conscious level. You're talking back and forth, mutual influence. Okay, and then in the line, I have to think this through a little bit. In the line below analyst, put one of those arrows with two pointing both ways. Every analyst looks at his or her dreams, so you have that relationship between your conscious self and your unconscious, personified by, often, it's not totally true in this day and age where gender stereotypes are not, we've loosened all that stuff up, but men will have dreams of women, and women will have dreams of men. And oftentimes they will personify your relationship to the collective unconscious. So you've got that interaction, and then below the patient, put another. We ask our patients to watch their dreams, right? And so you have that dynamism going, and then diagonally put one of these interactive lines between the analyst's anima and the consciousness of the patient. Our unconscious picks up stuff going on in a patient, oftentimes in an intuitive way, not even necessarily conscious, but you'd like it to be more conscious. And then put the other diagonal between the analyst's consciousness noting unconscious affect or whatever in the patient. And then at the bottom, put an interactive arrow between the unconscious of the analyst and the unconscious of the patient. So I think you can figure it out. There's about 16 dynamisms going on, and when I was down in St. Thomas, sailing on the schooner from St. Thomas to Montego Bay in Jamaica, it was like being in a space capsule. I came back, and you begin to do your work, and at some point, a couple of patients said, you were really pretty weird
when you came back.
First couple of weeks that you were back. So they were picking up on something of where I've been, and so you get this interactive dynamism. And of course, the real mystery is that unconscious to unconscious, but it's there, and so that's how Jungians take Freud's initial understanding of transference and kind of complicate it a bit. You all can probably think of stories where patients pick up on something in you, or you pick up on something.
This is one of my first patients on the couch. I was concerned with being called up, and I knew I was going to get a phone call from my commander about it, and it was like a Friday night, and that's when I'd see this guy. So I get a phone call, being told what's going on. I think we're being put on alert, so it's like the next step is something could happen, but we're being apprised of it. So I go right in to start the session with the patient. I think he just knows I'm not all there, and was furious, just let out some tirade at me. Just because of how I was reacting to this phone call, I brought that into the room and sat down and talked to him a little bit about it, and he felt better, or we got back on track, or whatever it is, but that's what it was. He was picking up that I wasn't totally there for him or something, and was furious about it.
In our training, you have to work with a male analyst and a female analyst, and so I was seeing June Singer, who wrote this wonderful book called Boundaries of the Soul. I don't know if that's on your shelf.
It ought to be.
June was kind of the matriarch of our institute. She had studied in Zurich. Her husband was a rabbi. Came back and he was killed, I think, in an auto accident, and their young adult daughter was killed. June had a tremendous grief dynamic, but she also, created this whole phenomenon called our Jung Institute in Chicago. But I was working with June, and it was just time to move on to a male analyst, and I switched. But shortly after that, June announced that she was taking a position on the faculty of the Transpersonal Psychology Institute in Palo Alto, California. I did not know that consciously, but looking back, I was picking up something. And who wants grief? I'd already slid off towards a new relationship for my own analysis. So I remember back in parish ministry sitting with a couple, and they had their backs turned to each other, and I think I said, "What's going on here?" And he kind of, "Nothing's going on here," but the affect radiated. So there's the analyst consciously picking up on affect that they couldn't, he couldn't identify and own. So anyway, transference is real interesting dynamic. What did Dora bring up in Freud? There was a reaction created in Freud that Dora brought up for him. Freud decided that the best outcome would be for R.K. to divorce and marry Dora. He thought this was a suitable match. This is for real. Was R.K. really a good catch for Dora? He had attempted to seduce her at age 14. This occurs with no awareness of her parents or his wife. He'd already seduced his own governess, who he spurned. He was a man that Dora had been traded for so that her own father had the freedom to carry on with Frau K. This deception had been difficult for Dora. Freud overlooked Dora as having real reasons for doubting the sincerity of R.K. and merely hysterical behavior. This is a case where the inner subjective discourse unfolding between analyst and patient are being created dynamically within the interaction while therapy is unfolding. I kind of read some of these summaries, and I remember, John Giannini. He was here at least on 2 site visits. His wife, Rita Thompson, taught at Harry Truman College in Chicago. And at one point, I was invited to go to a play called Freud, Dora, and the Wolfman at the theater there at Harry Truman College. And there was a mime company, I forget the name of the mime company in Chicago, that there was one woman who had a wolf skin over her and had just mastered the kind of gait that a wolf would have. And then there was a mime, a puppet, on Freud's shoulder that was his id. And so one of the moments I remember from the play, which I did get a Godiva for the best play around psychoanalytic themes that year, was this little id of Freud's. He said, "Now come on, Freud, didn't you get an erection when Dora was talking about observing her father making love with Frau K?" Something like that. It was really quite an entertaining play. This case had led to ambivalent critiques and appraisals. Its publication led to controversy over Freud's methods and his underlying psychoanalytic theories. It was condemned in an initial review as, quote, a form of mental masturbation, an immoral misuse of his medical position. However, it also provided the field of psychology very interesting findings. It impressed Ernest Jones, one of the early writers about psychoanalytic history, to become an analyst. and Jung read the case with a great deal of interest and enthusiasm. Many have criticized Freud's practice of taking psychological issues or problems back to sexual dynamics. Jungians would often call that reductive analysis. And there are other issues in the Dora case. The anti-Semitic culture of Germany and Austria back then may have affected the doctor-patient relationship between Freud and Dora. Freud's own inability to accept femininity, both his own and in general, may have limited his ability to determine the importance of female desire. Many have noted Freud's lack of an answer to the question, what do women want? What do women want?
I'll tell you what a 14-year-old girl doesn't know is an old man. You know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even in that era. Even in that era.
Even
right.
in that
Yeah.
era.
Yeah.
A 14-year-old doesn't want somebody like Floyd. Or Eric, whoever.
Yeah. Too intrusive.
No, too old.
He loved Lou Salome.
Freud.
Yes.
Well, what was the age
Well,
difference anyway?
He loved his wife's
40
sister.
years?
Yes, he did that too.
That
I don't know,
came
how
out.
much was the age difference?
Maybe 20 or 30, I suppose.
When you're 14, it's a big deal.
Might as well be.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah. Be
I think Frock,
Even
Air
if-
K,
Yeah.
was a young, handsome man, actually. Kind of debonair and...
not too
but
old.
I'm with
But a
you.
lot older than 14.
Yeah, I think...
Wonder what's going on in Freud's unconscious life. Denial.
Yeah. Well, Freud,
He
what?
remained somewhat ignorant of women.
He would have been somewhat
Deal with your own
different
kid, Freud.
Yes, he only analyzed himself.
And what use can we make of this today? You know, it's almost like a picture of the times, and some of the resistances and inhibitions that were present in that era.
Sure.
This just would not, even advising someone to do something is not part of what we do in therapy today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, historically, maybe that's the benefit of this, to get a picture of what was happening at the very beginning of psychoanalytic case histories and writing.
It's hard not to get distracted by it.
Well, don't you think part of it too is he was really enjoying figuring this case out? And it's almost like, you know, in some way, isn't he like maybe so caught up in that he thinks he's doing great? Or something, you know?
Well, a place for good discussion is, when have our theoretical views or understandings impinged in our work with patients?
Absolutely. We don't have those.
I said never.
Yeah, right.
Well,
An ideal candidate. No shadow, no issues, no sweat.
yeah, perfect. Just give me the credentials.
I remember doing, it's the case I'm writing, doing really well with this patient and thought I was really guarding against any sort of thing that might get in the way of the relationship, and then slipped right into something that really was disturbing to the patient, just right then. So thinking I was doing good, and it wasn't.
I observed a course wonderfully taught at an institute in New York where no other site visitor could get there. And I had the time, being kind of semi-retired, to call in and observe by telephone. And it was all around, we do need our theory, and we all have theoretical templates that we stand on. And of the importance of knowing that. And certainly it was a wonderful pitch to trainees. We have biases, and our schools of thought reinforce some of those predispositions that we might have. And you know, that's okay. It's just you need the self-awareness. And certainly I know as a Jungian, there are tremendous dangers of Jung's method of amplification, of meeting image with image and going off and amplifying briar spindles, and the patient sitting there saying, "My God," or the unconscious is saying, "This is just like my abandoning mother or abandoning father," and they're left there, unconnected to, while you're spinning out something. So those, or sometimes people get, I think, a bias of a lot of clinicians is reducing everything back to the family romance. I remember a patient who had a dream where she had like an 18-month child in her arms and kind of fell over backwards into a pile of leaves or something. Is that literally an 18-month-old child? What happened to her at 18 months? Or is that an image? Jung has that wonderful essay on the psychology of the child archetype. Is that an image of potentiality, where she drops the child that represents newness? So our theoretical biases are always kind of getting in there, and I think that's an implication of this case for all of us, is how do we avoid, there's actually a fancy word for it that I've got written down somewhere, but it's those unconscious acts of commission that actually intrude in the treatment, rather than that ability to stay connected or containing or listen, just simply
when it
listen.
becomes our stuff instead of responding to them.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, given the times, where men were the experts and women had a very defined role, what men really did know about girls and their sexual drives, their interests, anything else. It was a very patriarchal culture, and as such, sometimes I think there probably was more attributed to Arabs than necessarily was there. I think some of women probably were looking for not power, but maybe another word. It's not power is not exactly right, but
Choice
or validation or agency.
There you
Yeah,
go.
that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And I rarely see anything written really looking from that viewpoint, because basically until fairly recent, when you look at the beginnings of psychoanalysis and where we are now, were women really included? Anna tried, but she sure had to go up against the rock wall. And so, in some ways, I think that it more needs to be looked at as culture changes, because really, the time for psychoanalysis, between my adolescent years and now, there's many more years beyond. That's maybe sort of like what was appropriate when I was an adolescent is extremely conservative now. And so the culture changes. There's more eroticized now, so maybe everybody really was okay, this is there, it just didn't come out, that type of thing. But the effect of the culture is so, it can blur what's going on. And so I always want to put it in the culture, but you have to understand it.
Well, most of us think the patriarchal structures have been loosened up, broken up. The symptoms of a sick patriarchy have been identified and in many ways somewhat treated, but don't we all see patients that come from those authoritarian, autocratic backgrounds? And certainly I've had patients from Kentucky and West Virginia where there's been the kind of abuse that fathers not respecting the modesty of daughters, too open about pornography while the young girl is around, and this stuff carries forth in terms of trust of intimacy, trust of being loved not as an object but as a genuine human being, and so we still see a lot of this. The title I was searching for earlier, Murray Stein's book, is Jung's Treatment of Christianity. And in one of the...
Did you write an article in it, or you did in one of...
I may have alluded to it in one of the courses I taught down here. It's a wonderful book. You learn a lot about Jung's analytical psychology, and Murray is just a real Apollonic, clear-headed. He was a wonderful control analyst. He's my dissertation advisor, and but one of the chapters is called The Prognosis of the Patient. He moved into this healing relationship with Christianity and analyzed the split-off repressions and tried to integrate those, which included more respect for the feminine. And they had healing dreams for Christianity. One of the dreams had to do with a green Christ, and you could relate that to the vegetative side of that's highlighted in Gnosticism, where there isn't so much dominance of the masculine over the feminine, the spirit over nature, but anyway, one of the chapters is something to do with prognosis. Where it gets into if the doctor died before the patient got well. So if Jung were coming back, how would he diagnose the treatment of Christianity as a neurotic religious tradition? And he would see the regression. We see it in the Presbyterian circles. There are ministers who really want to take the churches back to about 1952 in terms of belief structures, power structures, wanting to leave PCUSA and go out to some more fundamentalist denomination. Jung would see that as regressive. We call it the regressive restoration of the persona in the face of shadow. We would experience it, I think, as resistance in some of our patients. You get close to working with some of this hot stuff in your psyche, and integrating the anger that you've never had permission to express, and people will flee treatment to go back to a pre-treatment status or psychology, and so the persona would be the adaptation to external reality. Persona was a Greek word used for the mass that Greek theater they would have a little wooden megaphone in the mask that would project the voice out to the audience. But it's your character, it's your role on stage. The wise man, the Medusa figure, the horrific mother. It's your role, and so persona is your adaptation to outer reality. So going back to the 1950s, he would see the feminist movement as being healthy, a positive indicator that the patient may be getting better. Ecumenical efforts in terms of a kind of a one-world theology, if you want to call it that. The pastoral care and counseling movement, he would very much affirm as the church beginning to meet people where they're really living. That's a fascinating chapter. I recommend the book if you can get it. I'm not sure if it's still in print.
Taught at Loyola.
What?
They taught at Loyola for a long time. Murray Stein. Was he faculty at
Oh,
Loyola?
he's
Where else?
taught all
Yeah,
over the
in
world.
the 70s, he was one of those figures. Bob Moore was always dropping his name too.
Yeah.
So in the Chicago area.
Murray moved to Zurich and eventually became the president of the International Association of Analytical Psychology. In other words, all the Jungian analysts in the world. I've got a couple webinars at the Asheville Jung Center in North Carolina, where Murray's been piped in, and wonderful presentations. Jung had this thing called the Red Book, and I heard Murray do a couple webinars, and you can still buy the DVDs through the Asheville Jung Center. But we were snowed in the Smokies there for a week at Bonnie's aunt's place in North Carolina, and I had Jung's Red Book, and you can't make sense. You can't even begin to make the journey through the Red Book without some kind of orientation. So I had these two DVDs of Murray's, and I'd go from reading the Red Book, which has an English translation in the new publication. I was actually in New York for meetings on Lower Manhattan, and the Red Book was at the Rubin Art Museum, and so I went downstairs where a lot of the images that Jung had painted and some of the calligraphy text was a certain reproduction process that they used to get the prints into the Red Book, and copies were hung on the walls, and right in the middle under glass lock and key was the original Red Book. So I'm down there calling Bonnie with my cell phone saying, I'm at Mecca.
Yeah.
And then after he ordered it, when it came out for publication, David ordered it and was one of the first to get, and it was delivered. You would think that the Holy Grail had been planted on the middle of the dining room table.
Then you have to carry it up the steps.
The table counterclockwise 3 times, bow before he,
Did you really?
ritualistically.
She has a hysteric but poetic.
You just opened
walking
it.
around the table 3 times counterclockwise. I mean,
And it wasn't a Jewish wedding.
There's now a published copy of the text of the Red Book without the calligraphy, and then there is a book by a colleague who may not be a Jungian analyst, it may be a historian, but it's called Reading the Red Book or something like that. Make a wonderful course, a year-long course of reading through the Red Book. And then my hero, James Hillman, and the guy who is the Pakistani scholar and historian of psychoanalysis, especially Jung's psychology, Sonu Shamdashani. Jung wrote his autobiography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections.
We have that on the show.
Sonu wrote a piece called Memories, Dreams, and Omissions about the Jung family keeping control of the Red Book, and but he's the one who really double-binded the Jung family into printing the Red Book out. It is about the right size of the original red cover, and so there's some good material out there. But Sonu and James Hillman had this dialogue. Hillman, I think, being in the last years of his life, and it's I think it's called Lamenting the Dead, and it's really about what is depth psychology after Jung's Red Book. Jung doesn't make any reference to mother, father, child, and so the argument they're making is we meet history in our dreams. And again, the danger of reducing dream material to the family, the biographical journey, that's not what Jung was doing. He was doing active imagination with ideas and some dreams, and it's got the sense at times of Alexandria in the 1st century or the century before Christ. There's historic stuff that kind of colors Jung's active imagination. It's a religious but heretical text, but it's a model. I mean, the discipline to do that kind of active imagination overwhelms me. I mean, most of us have a hard time remembering the dream we had last night, or maybe tell our spouse at the breakfast table, and better yet, write down on our computer or our own diary. But Anyway, depth psychology after the Red Book. It's a big question. What? So, the lamenting the dead is the past that we all carry with us. Jung would probably portray it as collective unconscious. The archetypal memory, not necessarily the personal memory. To make a fascinating course, but I started a course proposal for Marshall University, but just about the time they ran out of money for adjunct faculty. These 7.5% budget cuts per year in most states. I heard a presentation at the ASPA meeting in Chicago here 2 weeks ago. A man started out by showing slides of empty TB sanitariums, empty mental hospitals, and basically said, within 20 years, you're going to see a lot of what we call colleges and universities empty. The cost of higher education, in light of federal limits and state limits, it's just getting out of hand, and the easy access of the web, the low cost of hybrid courses through the web is just going to change things profoundly. Academics are going to fight it like crazy.
They had a debate on, I think is it Friday nights? Yeah. I guess I was going home last night. No, it must have been Thursday night. It was Thursday night.
On NPR?
They have an Oxford-style debate, and it was between more clicks or bricks. Academia is the building and the structure, and the clicks is the computer technology and the ability to do that. And so they were actively debating exactly what you're saying.
I actually heard a presentation once of a totally online site visit. A woman who used to be chair of the Library and Information Science at University of Wisconsin. She went to Tallahassee, and of course the site that was visited was the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, which is probably the best information and library science program in the country. So they picked a healthy one to do it. But I remember Jane's comment saying it was tremendously cost effective, but it was a nightmare for the site team leader to coordinate all the observations through things like this camera and the web.
You could certainly put on your best foot forward, could do that, because you have control of where the camera.
Right. Yeah, what you showed.
But in some ways, the desire to be in a therapeutic relationship is a direct reversal of that world of technology and lack of contact. And just the fact that we wanted to have everyone together face to face, at least for this first meeting, is a reflection of that also. That if it's only through a screen, you're missing something.
And what are you missing? That's what
That's, yes. What is it?
Connection, interaction,
It's the interaction,
seeing each other's faces.
peripheral vision.
For a while I was chair of the admissions committee for our training program, and we had an applicant who was very bright, but he had the self-awareness to say, I'm autodidactic. And our admissions committee basically said psychoanalytic training is not autodidactic, and that was too much for him. He withdrew his application. But it is, as I said earlier, it's a family experience. If you don't want to be affected, don't get involved in the faculty or the administration or supervision involved in a psychoanalytic training program. I lived in Rockford, Illinois, so when I went to training on Tuesday evenings, I had to drive into Chicago. And there was a case colloquium, called that's learning together collaboratively, and I had one woman who came into training when I did, and then there was a woman, older woman, who was a psychiatrist, and they both were from Wisconsin. And when one was presenting, the other one would defend, and vice versa. And this one, I think she actually had a psychotic experience earlier in her life, but she would get so abstract, and I don't know about you, but I sweat, in sessions. And I don't know what the hell's going on a lot. You kind of sit and listen, and all kinds of things that pop up spontaneously, and I sit there and here's this ideal case, naming every archetype on the planet, kind of like running around the globe 3 times in the space of an hour and a half seminar, and I would try to get in and get at some of the shadow, kind of knock her off her pedestal. Let's get human about this stuff. The other one would get defense. I would go home and have splitting headaches. And my analyst, I brought into analysis, my analyst said, well, there's probably something going on in your own psychology. And it did go back to mother and sister with dad at the golf course. And neither mother nor sister could tolerate anything but an idealized transference. And once I got that out in the open, I mean, my analyst was saying, you don't have to go in and knock them off the pedestal. Let the facilitator of the group seminar do that, group supervision. And so I just watched and let it happen and went home and slept well. But again, the transference, counter-transference, the group or family learning environment, and we are affected. Go back to Dora here. Some critics have noted that the psychoanalytic method can be a coercive way for the analyst as a man to assert his power over a female patient. Although we know historically that these days women can
Do the same.
cross, you can have boundary crossings and boundary conflicts or trespassing, and in psychoanalytic training programs there's the potential for incestuous closeness. It's hard to keep clean transferences sometimes in a training community, but women can cross those boundaries as much as men can. But historically, I think that critique is there. Freud may have put the whims of society and Dora's father ahead of Dora's interests. This may have slanted his analysis and got in the way of a successful treatment for Dora. Erik Erikson disagreed with Freud's claim that Dora must have responded positively to Eric K's advances,
He was in touch.
noting, I wonder how many of us can follow without protest today Freud's assertion that a healthy young girl would, under such circumstances, have considered Eric K's advances neither tactless nor offensive.
Now we call it sexual harassment.
Yeah.
Or abuse.
Assault, yes.
Feminists thought had also reacted to Freud's comment that, this is Freud, this was surely just the situation to call it distinct feelings of sexual excitement in a girl of 14. In response to Dora being kissed by, quote, a young man of prepossessing appearance.
A young man.
Yeah, Eric K. was a fairly young man. Freud, we all know, is criticized for his phallocentrism from the feminist critique. And Freud has also been called, criticized as a representative of patriarchy. And Dora has been seen as a symbol of, quote, silent revolt against male power over women's bodies and women's language. Even Freud's followers have taken issue with his inquisitional approach. One critic noted that he was, quote, more like a police inspector interrogating a suspect than like a doctor helping a patient.
I think Jung had a dream about Freud like he was some kind of border guard or something like that.
Could be.
It's mentioned in the movie too.
The part that I liked in the movie was, Freud was married to a woman from the second wealthiest family in Switzerland.
You mean Jung?
Yeah, and and of course that comes out of the movie quite a bit. She buys him the sailboat.
Right.
But when that Freud and Jung and Frenzy are getting on the boat to come to eventually to Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts, there's that party, and Freud and Frenzy go up to their second class berths, and Jung goes the other way and says, "My wife bought my ticket."
First
so he's
class.
going to first class.
And then Freud was a little pissed.
Well, both Freud and Jung had money complexes, very deep money complexes, and Jung, for a while there, long before Emma, he was a young psychiatrist, having to pay for his siblings, and although reading Jung, you'd never realize he had siblings, and then for his mother, who had been widowed, and he really struggled, and
He had to be in charge of handing out the household money to his mother and his sister because his dad had died. They didn't have very much.
Thinking of that movie, the last scenes there out by the lake, Xerxes. I wish they had ended that movie with Jung over the Red Book. There's a hint of Tony Wolfe, who becomes the new transference object, if you will. Another Jewish woman.
Yes, to be and the movie figures it out. Well, you got somebody new now. Is she Jewish?
But I
Half
think
Jewish.
I think
His wife is actually?
No. His new protege, mistress, whatever, is Tony Wolfe.
Tony Wolfe.
If you look at the large picture of the Congress in Weimar, whatever it is, she's sitting there in the front. Emma's sitting there, and a couple of women down is Tony.
There's a novel called "The World Is Made of Glass" that portrays Jung and Tony Wolfe down doing that genital thing at the boathouse, and Emma's up cooking cherry pies for the family, something like that. But in Zurich, there are many stories of they somehow worked it out.
Yeah.
And
They had dinner together on every Sunday, all of them together.
The three of them would walk into the Jung Institute. One woman on one arm, the other woman on the other arm, and it's like the gods from some Gothic myth that have come into the building, and tremendous transference stuff on all three of them.
Feels like another world.
Yeah.
Well, I think it is, yeah. I think it really is. And that's not the only time in history that's happened too. I mean, you see prophets here and there.
It seems like it's happening now again. There's a new concept floating around called polyamory.
Yes.
Which is, I think, the new name for wife swapping and cheating, except that it's with contracts and communication.
Yeah, and how well
Excuse
does
me
that
for
work?
being cynical.
That's right.
Somebody
No,
else
that's right.
is more in the know than I am.
There's a couple I work
It's the
with.
old term for it.
I'm looking at the younger
Polyamory.
Sex
generation.
with whatever
I think
moves.
that falls into that category of
Sex,
craziness
sex,
for the sake of TV sensationalism.
That's right.
That's kind of, there's a small subset of that. It's more for
Polymorph.
Isn't there some show called
Yes.
Sister Wives? And I think it's,
Yeah.
I'm talking about kids of friends of mine, grown kids of older friends of mine, and some clients. And there's some books that are the
When I
reference
was
books about this people are reading.
when I was a Unitarian parish minister, Unitarians seize on these books that seem to infect all the congregations in a district at the same time. One was called The Limits of Growth. We complain about 10% unemployment, but that book was looking at with automation and what have you, there will always be 10% unemployed due to the way the economy is set up. But nowadays, we gripe if it's 7.5% unemployment. One of the books that was circulating was Open Marriage. An awful lot of
Open marriage.
I don't think
Yeah.
people pulled it off, but
No. And the
But-
communes, that didn't work out so well.
I had a control analyst who went to South Africa, where there was a Jungian analyst who had connections to the Bush people. And so Lee went out into the bush country, and I remember him telling stories in class about how in the bush country, when a couple get married, they have to consummate it sexually, at which time she will always be his wife, but he's free to take on other lovers.
Oh,
And but his point was Psyche is
the
not.
women work.
Psyche is
And
not
our
monogamous.
Yeah,
Psyche-
the client is trying to convince me of that. They're not meant to be monogamous.
Well, you,
If we act like
it's
chimpanzees.
it's an ethical decision to be
Okay.
in a monogamous relationship
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a polygamous relationship. It's an ethical thing. It's not necessarily where psyche is for men or women. Look at people's dreams. But it is an ethical decision to make a commitment to be monogamous. Was it St. Augustine who said,
What's that?
I like that.
Simple.
I'm glad God doesn't judge my dreams, something to that effect. But let's talk about what is the place of case studies for psychoanalytic knowledge and discourse and understanding. What are we doing when we read case studies? I've summarized two that you could have a whole long course about, but when we all read case studies in training and as we age as analysts, what are we doing
Expanding our experience or exposure.
to what?
To what? To
Broader field, other
Process of
interpretations
psychoanalysis.
of the work.
the inner workings of individuals, because you can name something, but then it appears in different forms, in different manner. And more unusual cases might not come along that often, but we want to be exposed so that we could pick up early rather than go for who knows how long not getting it.
Well, I like your emphasis on the intersubjective and the interpersonal. It's been said when you read Freud's case studies, you're learning how to think like Freud.
Yeah.
But in a concrete, tangible moment. And it does expand knowledge and experience and perspective. And
then we can integrate and apply it, but we need exposure first. And, some of the more unusual cases who knows, if in your lifetime you would be exposed. However, if you have to wait for a lifetime for that, you might have missed it along the way.
I remember reading a case, there's a Jungian in California named Robert Hopke, has written a book called Men's Dreams and Healing. And there's a case in there where, in reading it, there's a man who keeps dreaming of a dark-skinned male lover. And Jungians inherit this tradition that the anima of the unconscious of a man is personified by the anima, and for a woman it would be a masculine figure, the animus. And it goes without question, but this particular case was about this man who, he may have acted it into a same-sex preference, but he had this dream series of this male figure who had a Mediterranean look, and but somewhere, as will often happen in analysis, synchronistic things happen. He got a letter from an adoption agency that he had actually been adopted by a Midwestern, probably Lutheran Caucasian family, and his parents were Greek or Italian, I forget which. But the point of the case study was to show that the unconscious of a man can also be personified by a male figure. The male figure could be an anima figure. So the loosening up through various perspectives, a new angle from the clinical intimacies of a case situation. Well, the one that article that I sent out, I think you all got. I thought was
This big article.
Yeah.
what's the author's?
Pledge.
Yeah,
PLET.
that raises the question of what is psychoanalytic knowledge. What is the nature of our field? I guess you could say.
Well, it felt like this was also psychoanalytic response to scientific evidence, that there is not hard research that we can do
Yeah.
in psychoanalysis, but the case study provides us with the tools to study, to learn, to expand, to compare,
Mhm.
to dialogue about. I mean, that's our way to grow.
Mhm.
I mean, if you want to stretch it, maybe that's also a way to build theory or to apply theory. But we can't do hard research.
Yeah. So it's a very unique kind of discourse,
Mm-hmm.
interactive dialogue between two people and their own inner subjectivities. I think we were set to end at 2. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, end on time.
A long but very interesting article.
Oh, the one by Pletch.
Yeah.
Pletch.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I found it interesting.
Well, the focus on process rather than product.
The what?
The focus on process.
Uh-huh.
And Freud's writing, the technique, blah blah, by whose means alone the pure metal of valuable unconscious thoughts can be extracted from the raw material of the patient's associations.
If any of you want to wait a minute, can you open up that
Sure.
We'll end this.
KPI?
He's
We'll end the video.